All right, we're going.
Okay.
So I'm with George Plauger, and I'm Emma Pringle. And right now it's April the 12th at 12:45. So can we begin with how you started working at the railroad?
I started in the early 70s. At the time, they had a lot of repairs to be done to coal cars, and they would hire people, and then they'd run all the cars through, and then however period it took, and then usually at the end of that period, they would furlough everybody because they didn't need it anymore because they had the car repair project finished at that time. And I was really fortunate because they went several years there that they didn't do anything, and the cars repairs got really neglected, and then they started back up. I started out working on the line up there as a welder, and we welded patches in the railroad cars, and then whatever maintenance that they needed on that particular car, we did that. And then they had crews that sandblasted them down and painted the cars, and when they come out of there, they look really good. It was a pretty expensive project in the time, but at the time the coal business was really booming, and it was hard to keep up with the demand for the cars. And after that, I went down and worked in the Roundhouse. They give me a crew there, a 5-man crew, and we took the heavy wreck cars and reassembled them, put new metal on them, and I was a welder and did that and loved it. It was a wonderful job, one of the best jobs in Elkins, and paid really good. The benefits were good. The days were long, it was hot, you was on a heating torch or behind a welding rod for eight hours a day. At the time, they give you a 10-minute break at 9 o'clock and one at 2 o'clock. So you would go from 7 o'clock to 9 o'clock without a drink of water or any break at all, bathroom privileges, and then you got a half an hour at lunch. And everybody was so wore out from the heat and everything, most of the guys took a little nap at lunchtime. And in the summertime here in Elkins on this railroad, that heat, when it would get up around 90, 95 degrees, the heat index was well over 100. And then you had those heating torches heating the metal, rebending, shaping the metal, cutting metal out, scrapping metal. And then they called it huck bolts, that they would put the plates back on the railroad cars with, and you'd hold those huck guns up over your head and huck the bolts fast. And it was a demanding job, but it was really a good job. And when you finished today, you actually felt like you accomplished something. Great, wonderful guys to work with. It was a shame. I wish that industry was still around. You developed really good work habits. It was fantastic, you know. I don't know anybody that worked on the railroad that didn't actually like working on a railroad. My father-in-law was a brakeman engineer for the N&W in Bluefield. So I guess somewhere I got into the railroad family. And then of course, we had the Roundhouse Fire, and it kind of put the end of everything, which that was later on. That was 75, I think it was. And the coal business was starting to slow down a little bit, and I think the railroad seeing what was going on. Coal was going to fizzle out in West Virginia, which now we see that's exactly what happened. And somehow I think they had a foresight to see that. And now if you look around, the rail industry in West Virginia is pretty touch and go. But I worked at here till the fire, and then they laid 86 of us off. I think they kept, it was either 12 or 16 employees they kept just to clean up and work the cars that come in for emergency stuff. But I transferred to Hagerstown and worked down there for 2 to 3 more years. Drove down there every week. There were 5 of us from Elkins that transferred down to Hagerstown, and we worked down there doing the same jobs. And I become a car inspector down there, and I'd inspect the cars and go through and kick them out and what they needed. And it was just fantastic. Well, then, for some unknown reason, Hagerstown had a fire also. So that was the end of us. And then Chessie System had taken it over full time then, and they decided they didn't need anybody anymore, and they wouldn't even let us transfer to other departments. And 3 or 4 years later, they were hiring new people off the street instead of honoring the old employees and let them transfer in the car department. So that was kind of the end of my career in the railroad. But if I had to do over again, I'd still be working right there. It was long, hard days, but it was a great job.
How long did you work there, do you think, total? Like how many years?
I pushed almost 10 years. I lacked 8 days of getting my railroad pension, which we figured out in the long run that was part of the plan. There were several guys that were just short of getting their pension, and they wouldn't give us opportunity to transfer anywhere. So it put a burden on everybody's family. Of course, you're there midlife and you had to start a new career over. So but it is what it is. It's history of the railroad. It's the way they roll.
Mm-hmm. What did you do after you ended your career at the railroad?
When I ended my career at the railroad, I was employed at UPS, which I retired after 30 years of service at UPS. I retired at UPS.
What was a normal day working on the railroad like? You talked a little bit about being a welder and the conditions of, all the heat and stuff.
In the wintertime, it was so cold out here. That was back in the 70s, and we would get winters, and usually in the middle of January, it would be down around 0 and stay there for a week and a half at a time. Of course, we were right out there in it. You'd shovel snow off. You'd make a path to your section where you worked. You shovel the snow out, and then they put up a 55-gallon barrel, and you'd throw a couple oil pads in there and some scrap lumber, and then you'd sit there around that fire barrel, and that would knock the edge off. Your fingers would get so cold running that hut gun that you couldn't actually hold the hut bolts up. But you didn't take that in consideration. You had a quota to get, and you give everything you did just to get there, to get your quota and get those cars moving out. In the summertime, it was just a reverse, and as soon as you put those coveralls on, you started sweating. And when it got up 90, 95, and the heat index is way out there, it took a lot out of you. Your coveralls, your t-shirt, even your pants would be totally soaked at the end of the day from sweating. And you'd be up underneath of those cars with the heating torches straightening metal out, and from the heat index and then the metal and the heating torch in there, it was really hot. But nobody complained, It was really good pay for the Elkins area. You did what you had to do, and you went on. You got used to it. You got accustomed to it. But the weather was a big factor. Everything was outside except the 5 or 6 crews that worked in the roundhouse, and in the wintertime, there's no air circulating in there, and that was the coldest place in the world. That you just couldn't stay warm working in the roundhouse. A lot of the old timers and the guys that'd been there several years, they wouldn't work in the roundhouse because it was just really cold down there. And the sun didn't come out, and you didn't get warmed up in the afternoon from the sun in the wintertime. It was pretty nice in the summertime, but there's no air flowing through there. And They were tough conditions. Wasn't the worst white job in the world, but it was a demanding job. It really was.
Can you tell me any days that you thought were really special?
Every day was special because working under those conditions, you had a good rapport with your other employees, and very seldom did you ever see another employee in a really bad mood, because we were always playing little jokes on people. Safety was a big thing then, but they didn't push safety back then the way you do now. You got away with a lot more, and there was a lot of joking around and playing tricks and gags on the other employees, and it made a really nice work environment, and everybody got along with everybody, and everybody laughed everything off, and it was just special. It really was. I don't know what else would tell you on it.
Well, some of the pictures that you gave us were of a derailment. I was wondering, were you there for the derailment?
They had they called it the wreck crew. It was like an 8-man crew. And you would get time and a half, double time, and a lot of times, if it was on a holiday, they'd actually pay you triple time. But when you went out on a derailment, I was lucky enough. I was one of the younger guys, and I kept putting in you had to put in for being on the wreck crew, and then you had to kind of work your way into it. Roy Himes was the wreck master, and they had a big wreck crane there. They called it Brutus, and it was something. And we'd go out on the wrecks, and they'd take the work crane out, and they'd reach it down over the bank where the cars had derailed over, and they'd lift it up and drag it back up in there, and it would be hanging suspended in the air, and you'd set it back over on the tracks, and then kick the trucks back up on the tracks. And once you left Elkins, you went to the job, and you stayed on the job till that job was cleaned up. And it was nothing to stay out there 3 or 4 days straight, no sleep. You'd get a break to go in, they'd bring you meals, they'd feed you meals. But if you got really tired, you'd run it. They'd let you go up and catch you an hour nap, and then you was right back at it again. Looking back on it, it was really dangerous, but it had to be done, and everybody liked the money then because it was all, and that's why there were a lot of older guys on it. They really liked the money aspect of it. We remember we was out of Bowden one day, and we got crawling up underneath the tracks. It was a chilly fall day, crawling up underneath the tracks, and there was a big old copper snake laying right up along the track. He was staying next to the track trying to keep warm, and you crawled under there to hook a chain up for the trucks, and you just turn around over there and you look, and there laid that copper snake looking at you, and it was a good job. It really was.
Nobody got bit?
No, that was usually a one-time deal. It didn't happen all the time. There was a lot of cables broke, and they would lift stuff, and they'd be pulling so hard on those cars trying to drag them up. Half of them would be full cold, and you'd be pulling those cars up over the side of the hill or whatever, and the cables would break. And when it broke, it was just like razor blades going everywhere. You really had to keep your heads up on watching the cables break, and then you'd have a car almost up on the track, and something would go wrong, and it would shift clear over on the other side of the track. And Roy Himes did a really good job of being the train master. He was right up on top of it.
So you were a welder, you worked on the wreck crew. What other jobs did you do?
At the railroad? That was about it. I was a welder, and that was full time. You started at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then you was on your crew, and you went in the car, or 7 o'clock in the morning, I'm sorry. You went in your car, and you sat in there, and you welded patches on, or you welded the frame back together, whatever. And that was for 8 hours. You stopped to grab another handful of welding supplies, and then when you had your 5-minute break or 10-minute break, and then lunch, you stayed right there all day long. That's all you did. And then inspecting the cars, we'd do every time a car would come in at Hagerstown, or a train would come in, you'd walk that train and physically look and see for any defects or anything that was wrong, brake levers hanging down, airlines broke, whatever, and then you would oil the journals on the boxes on the trucks. You carried an oil can with you and you did that, and then when the train would get ready to depart, you had to go out and do the air tests on them. You have an 80 to 200 car train getting ready to pull, and you had to do the air test on it. You get on the end of the car and the engineer would put the air to it, and then you had to do the air test to make sure the brakes were all working properly before you could dispatch out of there. That was really a good job also. You know. And then if something was wrong, if they wasn't getting the air test to come up to standards, then the game was on. It was rush, because they were on a schedule, and you had to find that problem and fix it, or else kick that car out. And that was pretty intense after you did the air test. If you had something that didn't come up, then you had to find it right now and find it, because that whole crew was being paid to depart at a certain time, and there you are. You're the hold up, and you had to get everything rolling and get the wheels turning. But you learn the secrets of it, and what usually goes wrong, and you knew where to look and how to fix it. So everything worked out. Train always moved.
What were some big changes that you saw during your railroad career?
Some good what? I'm sorry.
Big changes.
The changes mostly wasn't really changing. You was always on pins and needles, wondering how long this section of repairs was going to last. Am I going to be out of a job in a month? Am I going to be out of a job in a year? They could come in from any time during the day and say, hey, we don't need you guys anymore. We have to shut down. So you actually lived from paycheck to paycheck, because there was no yearly contract or nothing. It was day-to-day contract. When you come to work that morning, you knew you could be sent home that evening. Western Maryland really took care of their employees. That was one of the best companies ever. And Chessie took it over, and B&O and Chessie and C&O, and they just had too many things going on, and it kind of looked like your employees wasn't one of their major concerns. Safety become a major concern. The employees' livelihood, it was all about them making a dollar, and which it's still like that today, and that's what the world's running on now, is the feasibility of everything and whether everything's justified by the means. But that was the biggest thing, was watching and knowing how long your job was going to be secure. And then when the railroad actually burnt and everybody was out of a job, and they sat there for a year hoping that they'd start it back up. But they had no intention of starting it back up. But there was 86 people, I think, that was furloughed, and a lot of the 86 people, probably 30 of them, lost their homes and everything because they didn't have anything else to go to, and they just kept hanging on. Of course, the railroad said, yeah, we're going to rebuild, we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. They never did anything, and people just kept holding on, and they held on too long, and it just didn't happen. And I think there's still a lot of hard feelings over that fire in Elkins. That was for the shop, the transportation and track crew and everything. They kept working, but the shop, it was finished. Mm-hmm. So.
Can you tell me a little bit more about the Roundhouse Fire? When did it begin, and when did you arrive on the scene?
It was there, the fire, to my knowledge, Carl Totten, he was a carman also. He lived right on the corner there from where the Roundhouse sat. He called me at 2 o'clock in the morning and said, George, the Roundhouse is burning. He said, get your camera and get down here. And at the time, I was taking a lot of photographs. And I ran down there at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was fully engulfed. The whole front side of it, the windows and the bays, it was fully engulfed. And from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock, it was a really intense fire. And then after that, the roof started collapsing, and the machine shop up there, the roof was going. And then all the propane cylinders and oxygen tanks, they were exploding. And it was quite the fire. And I stayed around that morning, and I went out and I climbed up the water tower and took some surrounding pictures of the fire, which I've had them there in the picture albums. And, but it was quite the sight to see. You know, it was sad, but I'm glad I took the pictures. I can remember it, but I try to tell my grandkids about the Roundhouse Fire, and without visually having something to show them, it's hard to explain it to them. It really is. It was a tragedy, but it is what it is. You know, it is now history.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any regrets or things that you wish that you had done differently about your time working on the railroad?
No, I had a wonderful time. I learned a lot. That was one thing about the railroad. You had several 25, 30-year-old men there, great machinists, a lot of knowledge there, and they had no reservations at all of passing that knowledge on to you. If you were willing to learn something, that was the place to learn it, because those guys would actually show you how to do something, and they'd stay right with it till you learn how to do it. It's just a great bunch of people. It really was. That's pretty much all you can say about it. It's part of my past, and it's a part that I miss a lot. I wish I could have retired from the railroad. I have tried to go to different places just to finish my retirement out, just to say I did it, and it's pretty much locked in. You can't do it. I don't know how much money that the railroad actually saved by the people that was close to retirement not being able to get that retirement, or if they saved anything, I don't know. But it was definitely a hardship on a lot of people. And I don't regret it. It was a great time of my life, and like I say, I learned a lot from it and met a whole lot of wonderful men. We did actually have one lady that worked there, and she was a carman also, and she got right out in that dirt and grime, and it didn't bother her a bit. And being the only lady out of 86 people working there, she really caught a lot of harassment. It wasn't bad harassment, it was a good harassment, and she enjoyed it. And the guys was always, they loved being around her, because she pulled her in and more, and she was right there. I actually forget what her name was. I can see her face, but she was a hard worker. And that lady didn't have a bottle of fingernail polish. That's about it. I don't know much else to say anyway.
Well, but since you retired, you talked about different interests that you have, like going to auctions and getting photos and books and stuff like that. Maybe you could tell me a little bit about that. Anybody's worked a railroad, once you get it in your blood, it stays there, and
you can't go to an auction or somewhere like that and see part of your past and not buy little trinkets or whatever. And for the last 30 years, I've collected a lot of memorabilia. I had a speeder, which is a rail car that has a motor on it, and I purchased and completely restored it. And I have a hand pump car, and it's one of the few that's in the state of West Virginia now, if not the only one. And I have a lot of lanterns, locks. I've actually have the silver dinette set that was in the diner car that went through Elkins. I've got the Shea engine bells, whistles. I've just been collecting over the years, and it's fun to collect that stuff, and there's no end to it. Once you get something, you always want more or something better. And I'm not a person to trade stuff, so once I buy it, I ended up keeping it. So I've got quite the collection of railroad stuff, and eventually it'll probably end up here in the Railroad Museum, you know, because my wife has no interest in it, and my children, they just like the stories, but they don't like to dust a Shea engine bell every month or polish it with brass on. So I hope a lot of people that's collected stuff like that can give to the museum, where people could actually look back and see, boy, I wish they had jobs like that today, you know. They're hands-on jobs, and they're not like going to a desk and sitting in a cubicle all day with a computer screen. You know, you get out there, and all that stuff reminds you of it, and it brings back a lot of memories. So. But I'm just one of 500 or 600 people that worked here at Elkins, and they all have memories. And you hear very few bad memories about it. You know, it was just a great place to work. Good life. Sometimes you wondered if you was going to make it through the day. You know, if you was walking up and down that track with an oil can, you just put one foot in front of the other and kept on going. It was a demanding job, a rewarding job.